Over the past few days, we've seen a wave of key appointments and replacements within Iran's leadership. A new head now leads the National Security Council, and Ahmad Vahidi has taken over as commander of the IRGC. So what's really behind these changes? What signal is Tehran sending, and what do you think is driving this reshuffle at the top?
Well, some of these people are not really. There haven't been changes. Some of them have been in charge, but their names were not declared for security reasons because of the potential for war. But I think by announcing the names, it just shows that the Iranians are much more confident about the security of their officials now in case of war. And that, as the United States, some are saying that the Americans are preparing themselves for war. Well, so are the Iranians. Every day that goes by, the Iranians are preparing they're building more missiles, more drones. They're expanding their underground missile bases. They're expanding their command and control structures. They are developing new technology, new missiles, new drones, and they're enhancing their ability to block a land assault and to be able to carry out operations in the Strait of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf, and in the Arabian Peninsula. So these announcements, I think, are a sign of confidence in their position. Also, we saw that Ayatollah Seyed Mujtaba Khamenei, had a 7 to 8 hour meeting with President Pezeshkian, which I think is very significant. A 7 8 hour meeting is, pretty difficult. It's a very, very long meeting, but I think it just shows the degree of coordination that exists. But also, it just shows how things in Iran are normalizing despite the threat of war. The military leaders, their names have been announced. The leader and the president are having regular meetings, and they're fully coordinated. So I think all of this is a sign that Iran is prepared for the next stage. The most important change is Mohsen Rezai, Dr. Mohsen Rezai, becoming the chair of the Supreme National Security Council. I think this is a signal that Iran is going to be more assertive in dealing with the Trump regime. And also on the last day of the previous chair's time in the previous chair of the Supreme National Security Council's leadership of the council, he put out a statement, as we all know, saying that the only way that we'll have peace with the United States is if certain conditions are met. Some people are saying that is different from the MOU, but that's not the case. But it is saying that the MOU has to be fully implemented. It's a maximalist approach to the MOU. And so, for example, in the MOU, in Article 1, it speaks about Lebanon and regional allies, right? But here in that letter,
all fronts, they call it all fronts. Yeah.
Yes, all fronts. In this letter by the outgoing chair of the Supreme National Security Council, Palestine is mentioned specifically. So is Yemen, and so is Iraq alongside Lebanon. And it's not even Gaza; it's Palestine. So this is something that I've been saying on your show many times, that in the MOU, Gaza is included. And Dr. Ghalibaf, the chief negotiator, has said this to a number of Palestinian delegations and to the leader of Hamas, who he spoke with on the phone. So, but it has been more clear that without an end to the genocide in Gaza, without an end to the war on the Palestinian people, this doesn't come to an end. Now, some may say that, well, then there's not going to be an agreement. That's something that the United States will have to think about, because they don't control the Strait of Hormuz. So the outgoing chair, who was, I think, not as assertive as Dr. Mohsen Rezai, his final statement was very hard, was very harsh, was very, let's say, was strong. Uh, but I think Dr. Reza's appointment is a sign that Iran is going to be more assertive. And it's also going to strengthen the Supreme National Security Council because he is a heavyweight. He, as you know, he's a very well-known person in the country. He was the head of the guards when Saddam Hussein invaded Iran. He basically built the guards. He was the chief architect. He created he took the initial steps of creating its air force and its navy too. He was also the longest serving chief of the Revolutionary Guards. He has a PhD, I think, in economics. Maybe I should have looked this up, but I think it has to do with economics. He was the economic, he was the economic deputy of President Raisi, and he's had a host of important jobs during the last 47 years. So, and the Supreme National Security Council is not just about war. It's not just about security. It's about everything. In other words, it's about social issues, economic issues, foreign policy. So all the issues that the state has to deal with is discussed in the Supreme National Security Council. And a heavyweight has to be there to coordinate the president, the head of the judiciary, the head of parliament, the armed forces, the foundations and the state-owned foundations and other entities that are affiliated to the state in order for them to work together more closely, which is very important during these circumstances when the country is at war. So I think we're going to have a stronger Supreme National Security Council, more coordination between the different parts of the state, and a more, let's say, assertive position taken at the negotiating table, on the battlefield, when it comes to dealing with Iran's enemies.
An interesting perspective, though it's worth remembering this reflects one side's interpretation of the reshuffle. Whether it signals strength or caution is something analysts on different sides of this conflict clearly see differently. What's clear is the timing isn't accidental, given everything happening around the Strait of Hormuz right now. I want to go back to something Mohsen Rezaei back in April, right when the ceasefire was announced. He suggested that offense would be Iran's best defense against the United States. Given everything you've described about Iran preparing for a possible confrontation, how do you think Tehran would actually respond if the U.S. did decide to strike? Would it be a repeat of previous rounds, hitting targets in the south and west, going after specific islands? Or could we see a real escalation this time, say strikes on facilities like Asaluye or other oil infrastructure in southern Iran? What would that response look like under this new leadership mindset?
It's unclear. We don't know, because during the 40-day war, the United States and the Israeli regime bombed places across the country. They bombed on day one. They bombed schools. They bombed a hospital in Tehran, which is still closed, the Gandhi Hospital, and
the pharmaceutical plants was
pharmaceutical plants. Yes, the steel industry. They also bombed a sports complex, killing a lot of girls who were playing volleyball, and they used a new missile to do it. And but during the 13-day war, where after the U.S. violated the MOU and undermined it and restarted the war, they used a different pattern. The strikes were mostly focused on targets in the Persian Gulf region, the Strait of Hormuz. They still bombed schools and hospitals. I mean, the hospital in Ahvaz, the children's cancer hospital, was they bombed the complex, and the hospital was evacuated. I don't know if it's still empty or not, but they've destroyed health centers and public facilities, and they've murdered many people in their cars and families. On Gresham Island, they bombed a family home, murdering a husband, wife, and their daughter, and their son, their 18-month-old son, and 2 other children were left as orphans, wounded, but survived. So, but the pattern was different. They didn't bomb the entire country. So it's unclear what happened next. But And I think this is very important, Nima. Look at Iran as over the past couple of years. First, they began with True Promise 1. And in True Promise 1, they were checking to see what capabilities the Israeli regime had. The Americans and the Israelis wasted a lot of air defense missiles to take down Iranian drones and missiles. In True Promise 2, the Iranians became more effective, also forcing them to waste a lot of their defenses. And then, but as we moved forward, then the 12-day war, then the 40-day war, we saw that the Iranian capabilities became better and better. And then during the 13 days of fighting, when the United States attacked Iran again, after the United States wrecked the MOU, they attacked Iran for 13 days, and after 13 days they stopped it, but Iran attacked for a couple more days. The Iranians improved their capabilities, were even better than during the 40 days of fighting. So Iran has been consistently getting better on the battlefield. Its capabilities are improving. And as we speak, the Iranians are preparing for the next phase. So although the Iranian economy is obviously hurting, and there's inflation and difficulty, but the Iranian armed forces are more prepared than ever before. So if the United States strikes, I think that the pain that the Iranians will inflict will be enormous. But the Iranian response will depend on the nature of U.S. strikes. But in any case, those countries that are assisting the United States in this war of aggression, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and so on, and Oman, they all have they have nothing to complain about if Iran strikes back, because they are a part of this war, and they are allies of the United States. They have assisted the United States and the Israeli regime in any way or form possible. They assisted the Israeli regime because during the 40-day war, the Saudi territory was being used, and so was the territory of Qatar and others, where their airplanes, their planes would fly and then refuel Israeli jets. So they were effectively, by assisting the United States, they were assisting the Israeli regime too. So it's not as if the Saudis and the Qataris and the Emiratis and the Kuwaitis were just helping the United States or the Jordanians. They were helping the Israelis, both during the 12-day war, because Israeli jets need American refuelers, refueling planes. During the 12-day war, they assisted the Israelis, and the 40-day war, and so they've been a part of the assault on the Iranian people for multiple wars. The Saudis in particular, Jordan in particular, but also the rest of them.
Meanwhile, the war inside Yemen is still very much active. Saudi Arabia continues its campaign there. And overnight, we got word that at least 4 or 5 field commanders, brigadier generals among them, on the Saudi-backed side in Yemen were struck by drones and missiles from Ansar Allah, the Houthis. I'm talking specifically about the pro-Saudi forces fighting against them on the ground there.
Remember, they just to clarify, the Yemen is the capital of Yemen is Sana'a. It is controlled by Ansarullah and its allies. The government of Yemen is the government that is in Sana'a. For well over a decade, the Saudis and the Emiratis and the West and these regimes in the Persian Gulf and Egypt and Turkey and everyone worked together and helped the Saudis and the Emiratis to dislodge Ansarullah and its allies from Sana'a. But they failed. Why? Because the people support Ansarullah. And so, the entire West and its regional proxies together were working to undermine Ansarullah. And they carried out a genocidal war, just like in Gaza. They starved the people. They slaughtered people. They bombed schools, hospitals. They bombed weddings and school buses and funerals. They did all the sort of the things that we would see in Gaza. Only it was done in silence. The the global support, the regional support that we saw grow after Gaza, we didn't see that with Yemen. It was just Iran that supported the people of Yemen, and people, many people in the West who were protesting, who were trying to put pressure on the United States to change its policies. But there was no sympathy. Despite all that, when Gaza was under assault, it was Yemen, it was Ansarullah that stood up for Gaza, not the Saudis, not the Emiratis, not Turkey, not Egypt, not Jordan, not any of these countries. And that's why the United States attacked them. So the government of Yemen, the real government of Yemen, is the government in Sana'a. That means Ansarullah, what the West likes to call the Houthis. But it's not really Houthis. It's much broader than a tribe. It's the vast majority of the people of Yemen. 80% of the population of Yemen live in the territories controlled by the government in Sana'a. So you're absolutely correct. The Saudis have been using their mercenaries, because they are mercenaries, to attack Ansarullah during the last few days, but they failed. The Ansarullah has been striking them hard across the board. And again, so even though the Saudis, they speak of the legitimate government in Yemen, that's the government that was endorsed by the UN Security Council was only endorsed because of Saudi wealth and Emirati wealth. Otherwise, it's not the legitimate government. It's only the government on paper. The real government is the government that's in Sana'a, the capital. And they've done a very good job over the last few days defending the country against the Saudis and their mercenaries.
Meanwhile, the war inside Yemen is still very much active. Saudi Arabia continues its campaign there. And overnight, we got word that at least 4 or 5 field commanders, brigadier generals among them, on the Saudi-backed side in Yemen were struck by drones and missiles from Ansar Allah, the Houthis. I'm talking specifically about the pro-Saudi forces fighting against them on the ground there.
Well, what Yemen wants is that after the Saudis lost the genocidal war against Yemen, and again, the Saudis were like the Israeli regime. They starved people with the help of the Americans and others. They starved the people. They imposed a siege in the Red Sea to prevent food from getting in. They wanted to starve people. That was the objective, just like Gaza. And they did that. Many people died of illness and starvation and so on in Yemen. One of the forgotten crimes, but one of the great crimes of our time. In numbers, they said it's in the hundreds of thousands. So Saudi Arabia never lifted the siege, even after the ceasefire. The Yemen ultimately forced Saudi Arabia to accept the ceasefire when they started targeting Saudi facilities a few years ago. And then, but since then, the Saudis have imposed a siege, and they've been preventing women and children because they're trying to really starve the country. And of course, they have the support of, other countries too. Money talks. So Yemen, after the Saudis bombed Sana'a airport when a delegation was returning from Iran, they said enough is enough. And they started pushing back and imposing their own siege on Saudi Arabia to bring an end to the siege on Yemen. So the siege on Saudi Arabia that we're now seeing being implemented is to force Saudi Arabia to end the siege on the people of Yemen. So, people only talk about what Yemen is doing to Saudi Arabia. This is a reaction to what Saudi Arabia did. And the Saudi regime began this chapter by bombing the international airport and then bombing the Al Hudaydah port. So Yemen is assertive. They're powerful. They're ready, and they're much less vulnerable than the Saudis because the Saudis have so much to lose. All those refineries and all those petrochemical plants and those oil export facilities. If they're destroyed, then Saudi Arabia falls. And Yemen has shown its capabilities over the past few days. But the Saudi regime, instead of seeking to solve the problem in their arrogance, they continue the war. I mean, the genocidal war in Yemen, which lasted for years, the Saudis spent hundreds of billions of dollars. When you add that to the mega projects like the line and so on that have been huge waste of money and a great way to to steal money, billions of dollars of money from public funds, the Saudis are not in a financially great position anymore. And so this siege in the Persian Gulf and the siege on the Red Sea on Saudi ships, it's very bad news for the Saudis. They don't have the sort of wealth that they used to. And of course, it is a country that consumes huge amounts of money. So they're starting to try to take their wealth from U.S. stock market, the bond market, banks in the West. So money has to go back to Saudi Arabia as long as the Americans, of course, allow it. The same is true with other countries in the Persian Gulf, but Saudi Arabia is particularly vulnerable. But one thing that I should point out, because you alluded to this, the Saudis also pay for the U.S. attack on Iran. You were saying they pay for, they pay they don't only provide the United States with air bases and the right to fly over Iranian territory, to refuel Israeli jets or American jets, or to fly over their own territory to bomb Iran, or to fire missiles. No, the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Kuwaitis and Qatar, I don't know about Bahrain, probably it's the same. All of them pay for U.S. costs in their country. It's not as if the United States said, I want a base here, and then the United States pays rent. The United States doesn't pay anything, but also all the costs for those bases have been paid for by the host countries. And during war, the costs increase. And Iran has information that Qatar was having trouble funding the war during the 40 days. The expenses were so high, they didn't have enough in-hand cash to easily pay for everything. So Saudi Arabia and the Emirates were not just assisting the United States, they were funding the war against Iran. And of course, that's what they're doing now. U.S. costs in their country, whether is being taken care of by these regimes. Now, the United States is spending a lot of money anyway, but a big part of the burden is on the shoulders of these family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf region. I'm sure it's not the case with Jordan, because Jordan is a basket case.